etc. And these kind of decisions, which are called the preconception contract, is what this young boy was innocently referring to in neglect. And I'd like to say that we always pick the parents that are perfect for our best happiness, but in fact, the preconception contract is usually not about maximizing our happiness. It's about maximizing the lessons we're going to be learning in that next incarnation, which is probably the only way that most of my clients can explain why they picked the parents they picked.
Well, I have to honestly say in my journey, I chose very well because I have a beautiful mother. She's still alive, and she's the most wonderful woman you'll ever meet. I chose very well.
Your mother for happiness. That is like a. I won't say it's all that rare, but that is wonderful. So that's one of the things we do in my work with past life regression is examine the preconception contract to see not only why we chose these parents, but what is our purpose in the world? What is our destiny? Why are we here? And that's an important thing for many of my clients to discover as they make their way through a world becoming increasingly complex and where there's continual challenges to create a career for oneself.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's very important. You know, when you know your past, it could kind of help you to succeed in your future, so to speak.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Not only that, but we can remember, by going back in our past lives, we can remember the talents and abilities that we have developed in the past. And we remember the relationships that we have developed over many past lives. So that we have the ability then to bring forward all the wisdom of and the knowledge and the experience and the talent of thousands of years and making those present for us in the present. This is one of the most powerful techniques I teach, and it's unique to the alchemical world. It's called the elixir of immortality technique. The elixir, of course, is a word for beverage, or which represents the elixir of immortality represents the fountainhead of wisdom, longevity, and eternal life to the ancient alchemists.
Wow!
And when I use the elixir technique, I use it to merge past lives with the present. So that basically I have a pretty continuous record in memory of most of the last 2,000 years as a result of doing this technique many times over the last 40 years of my work as an alchemist. This is why I could sit across the banquet table from King Francis I of France and immediately recognize who he was and what my relationship to him was. And I could easily, without going in any trance whatsoever, I could remember the beautiful songs that I wrote for him back in Paris in 1500.
Wow.
So, can you imagine what it would be like to have complete memories of who you are and where you've been for the last, say, 2,000 or 3,000 years?
Well, you know, like I've gone to Native American powwows and stuff, and I'll listen to the dancers and I'll hear the music, and, you know, I'll sit there and go, never heard this song before in this life. Why does this sound so familiar? Why is this so... Why?
So true. Isn't that exciting? I know it. You experienced that. You know you've been in a past life before in some sweat lodge where that song was being sung.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I've had many people who are in my training have had that kind of recollection. Even if it's only the subtlest hint. I, for example, will sometimes, I remember one time hearing the sound of what was supposed to be a stranger, but his face looked very familiar to me, started to sing a Gregorian chant out of nowhere. And I suddenly started joining him. Next thing you know, we're doing perfect harmonies in a Gregorian chant. He and I have never even met each other. Neither of us have ever chanted anything Gregorian in this lifetime. But we knew every note. That's an example of that same thing.
Well, you know, that's just like the lady who was talking about her son in the chat room. His music teacher, she's writing this down as we're speaking on air, and she's saying that the music teacher said that he started playing notes for her as she had never taught him before. And when asked, how did you know this, he just kind of said, I don't know. I remember it.
That's a very, very good example of the same phenomenon, exactly. That's why music really links us to so many gifts and powers from the past. We use a lot of chanting and music. In fact, in my training, we have an Indian chant. We begin to hardly read a word of music. I read music at the level about the third grade. Which is where I'm sorry to say my piano lessons stopped because I had no talent. But once I found my past life as a classical musician, I now entertain big crowds.
Wow, David, I didn't know this. That's fantastic.
pretty exciting, actually. It's pretty exciting. Everywhere I go where there's a piano, a crowd will quickly gather around me. But when people say, can you play a little of this or that, I don't know how to play from written music at all. It's certainly not adequate to the kind of immensely powerful music like Franz Liszt or Chopin that comes out of my fingers whenever I play. So it's very fun, very entertaining. Now, I've actually counted up to over 25 creative abilities, most of which I developed in previous lives and which I can use in the present. Everything from poetry to playwriting to acting and theater and music. And I don't consider myself any more creative than anybody else, frankly. It's just that I am aware of the many past lives in which I did all these things. That's the only thing that separates me from you or somebody else. Imagine you have as many treasures in the depths of your subconscious mind, the depths of your past lives, as I do. Probably more.
Oh.
I spent a lot of my past lives screwing around as a warrior and screwing around with women, too. So I'm not a particularly creative guy, but when you turn on the elixir of immortality, turn on the floodlight of knowledge into your past and learn how to contact those past lives in a moment without any transinduction. Just as soon as you see something, go, yes, I remember this, and here it is, and here's the memory flooding back.
Wow.
The opportunities are enormous, the use of the elixir technique. This is one of the things that distinguishes my training from all other past life regression experiences, is the use of the elixir technique. So let me give it to all of your eager listeners.
Okay.
Here's how it works. Let's say you go back to a past life you have creative ability. Let's say we go back to when I was that seducer but also musician in the court of King Francis. At the end of exploring and discovering all the creative abilities that Francis had to bring forward, after getting his promise, and I mean it was a serious promise, never to misuse the trust of women again, or their bodies, that was an essential promise, then I used the words, would you like to come forward, Francois, the musketeer, to join me, to assist me, because he was a very excellent musician, an entertainer, a court jester, and I at that time had I was a terrible teacher. I was kind of clumsy and pompous and had no sense of humor, and which was well known by my few friends. I wanted what he had. When I saw his easy sense of humor, his fun, charismatic appearance, his wonderful articulation, his beautiful singing and playing, I said, I want you to come back with me. And when he agreed to do so, then, of course, one has to ask oneself, am I willing to bring him forward? And asking the higher self, is it appropriate that the two of us return together to, at this point, Guerneville, California in 1976? That's the year that it happened. And then, when I came out of trance, he and I were together in one body, and it was an amazing experience. To have all the richness of his short but very exciting life packed into my own memory was an amazing experience. And that's why ever since, when I met people, I go, oh, yes, I know who you were back then, and yes, I know you remember that that this happened between us, and blah, 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 blah. It's been an amazing journey. And my students in my training are going through the same phenomenal experience as they access and bring forward creative abilities, and which don't just include the fine arts. We're not just talking art or music. We're also talking about the gifts of astrology and ancient wisdom, gifts of science and medicine, abilities like charisma and even childcare can all be brought forward from a past life.
Well, could that make someone who wasn't very domestic in a past life not be kind of the same in this life, or completely the opposite?
Wasn't very domestic. What do you mean?
What I mean by domestic, for example, whether it's a male or a female, when I say domestic, they weren't very, didn't want to tend to the kids or didn't want to cook or clean.
I've got a great story about that, which I actually teach at my
training. Right.
This has to do with fixing traumas from past lives. This, by the way, is a true story of one of my students who came to me with the issue that she wasn't able to keep house. The dishes piled up in the sink. She had a love where housekeeping became a huge problem for you. She discovered a past life as a servant girl who incidentally had grown up in Paris and had a wonderful time in Paris with her friends, living the high life. But like so many other young women of her time, she was unable to find a job in Paris to support herself. So she essentially sold herself into servitude to a wealthy family in the suburbs, way out of the country outside of Paris. She was isolated from her friends and family, living a lonely life, cleaning and cleaning and cleaning. And now she never really described her owners, her bosses, shall I say, the nobility that had a huge mansion, as being cruel. They didn't need to be. All she had to experience was the bitter, repetitive acts of cleaning, unaccompanied by love or happiness or friendship, drove her to despair. And of course, when she died of cancer in that life, she made the decision, I will never clean house again. Cleaning house is so hateful, I'll never do it again. And now one should always be very cautious before making a promise or a vow at the moment of death. Everybody familiar with past life regression knows that that moment of death, which is a technical term, by the way, is parinirvana, the moment where you meet your higher self. While according to the Buddhist teachings, it's a perfect time to take leave of this physical plane and release your karma, most people don't. Most people do something really dumb, which is to make some silly vow to their higher self. You know, I'll always love her forever, or in this case, I will never do housework again. These what are called post-death contracts can be very deadly, and we see that happening in her case. Well, what we have to do then is we have to change the promise she made to her higher self. And this required me to educate her with that very simple phrase, that was then, and this is now. Back then, you were a servant, you were isolated from family and friends. It's understandable that, and of course, there was an endless series of chores to keep up this big mansion. No wonder you were exhausted. No wonder you made such a promise. But now that you are living in Berkeley in the 20th century, this was about 20 years ago this came up, you're living in Berkeley in the 20th century, and it's a beautiful city of light. You have lots of wonderful friends. You have a beautiful, educated, and cultured environment in which to participate. You're going to have such a wonderful time. And there's only a little bit of cleaning that needs to be done with your small apartment. You even have things like dishwashers and vacuum cleaners to make it easy. And it's only a small apartment, and when that apartment is clean, you'll be able to entertain all of your friends in the city of light that is Berkeley, California.
I love Berkeley, California. I love Berkeley.
City of light, to a very enlightened city, and especially in the 80s, a lively time. And her past life self was radiant. Well, the next day, when this student showed up in class, her eyes sparkling with joy, she said that her inner French maid had kept her up till 4 o'clock in the morning, joyously scrubbing every surface in the house, scrubbing every dish, singing with joy and happiness because she knew that she was liberated and that her housekeeping services would now be welcomed in the kind of life of friendship and love she'd always dreamed of. That's an example of using the elixir technique. We brought the maid forward into her present life, and one thing this maid knew how to do was clean. So when she brought her forward with a new dedication to building a happy and wonderful life in a beautiful city of friendship and love, then everything shifted. And she has remained, as far as I know, she's probably remained clean and sparkling to this day. But that was that happened in her. I mean, I didn't even give her instructions or use any suggestion, hypnotic suggestion about cleaning the house at all. Everyone was kind of surprised that she had gone home from class that day and just immediately, joyously gone to work. So even a skill as simple as housekeeping or child care can be brought forward from a previous life.
I believe that. I really do. I'm convinced of that myself.
Yes.
That's amazing, David.
So a lot of my work with clients and also in our training is helping you access the immortal being that you already are. That's why it's called the elixir of immortality. Discovering who you have been and what you have done.
Astrology who taught me my method of astrology, my immediate past life, was a nun. And I say that, everybody in my family laughs. Oh, that's funny. Because I guess I'm no none now.
You're not